They will call you toxic for even noticing it. They will shame you for naming it. They will guilt you into silence, not because they are right, but because they are afraid. Afraid of what you would become if you remembered what you are. Because a man who remembers is a man who no longer obeys. This quiet erasure of the masculine spirit, it did not happen by accident. It was not the product of progress. It was the engineering of obedience. A system so delicate and precise, it turns warriors into dependents, leaders into pleasers, protectors into performers. You feel it, don't you? The slow bleed of your soul. In every moment you hold back what you know to be true. There is no tragedy greater than a man who has forgotten the sound of his own voice. And this world has become a graveyard of forgotten voices. But here's the truth. The feminization of men is not a coincidence. It is a strategy, not by one man or one institution, but by the silent machinery of comfort, of conformity, of control, by the algorithm of convenience that rewards passivity and punishes conviction, by the culture that mocks fatherhood, ridicules strength, and rebrands discipline as aggression. The modern man is not weak because he was born that way. He's weak because he was trained to be. He's not lost because the path vanished. He's lost because they taught him to stop looking, to numb himself with pleasure, to outsource his masculinity to brands, screens, and substances, and most of all, to sever his own inner authority. Because a man who no longer trusts his instincts is a man you can tame. You see, Carl Jung warned us. He said, no tree can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. But they clipped the roots of men. They taught us to fear the dark, to fear anger, to fear our shadows. And in that fear, they made us manageable. But let me ask you something deeper. What is masculinity without danger? What is masculinity without the capacity for wrath? It is nothing but an empty shell, a suit without a soul. They want the lion's body with the lamb's mind. The power of manhood stripped of its sovereignty. And so they engineered guilt, not for doing wrong, but for simply being male. You're not just up against your own flaws. You are up against a cultural hypnosis, a spell that convinces you to apologize for your presence, to shrink your frame, to dull your edge. They have redefined masculinity not as noble strength, but as a pathology. And in doing so, they have robbed millions of men of their natural birthright, their fire. This fire is not toxic, it is holy. It is the fire that built civilizations, that protected tribes, that stood unshaken in the face of chaos, that lifted families, created order, and defended the sacred. But when that fire is condemned, when it is medicated, mocked, and buried under layers of political guilt, what remains? A man with fire still inside him, but no map to reach it. Let's tear that map out of the fire. Let's go back, not to tradition for tradition's sake, but to origin, to that primal core within you that knows what it means to stand, to speak, to fight, not for dominance, but for truth. Because masculinity is not about control. It's about command, not of others, of self. A man in command of his impulses, his direction, his destiny, that man is a threat, not to society, but to the systems that profit off his confusion. Understand this. The feminization of men was never about women. It was about power. It was about erasing the polarity of nature so thoroughly that neither man nor woman could recognize themselves anymore. So that all of us would become malleable, marketable, medicated. Because a man with no identity is a consumer with unlimited hunger. Look around. Everything is engineered to weaken you, not by force, but by sedation. Porn to drain you, sugar to dull you, scrolling to numb you, bureaucracy to break you, medication to silence you, and ideology to shame you into passive compliance. And then they ask, Where have all the real men gone? They're buried under layers of psychological anesthesia, drugged by dopamine and drowned in doubt. But here's the sacred truth: you are not extinct. You are dormant. And it is time to awaken. You will not awaken through comfort. You will awaken through confrontation, not with others, with yourself, with the parts of you you've been taught to hide, the parts that rage, that lust, that dream, that desire to build, to hunt, to protect. These are not the enemy, these are the engine. You must reclaim your shadow, as Jung said, for it is in your shadow that your power sleeps. It is not your polished, perfect self that will liberate you. It is your raw, unrefined self, the beast who remembers. Every man must go to the underworld of his own psyche. He must face the demons that shame built, the guilt of masculinity, the resentment of being unwanted, the humiliation of being invisible. You are not weak because you feel those things. You are weak only if you let them define you. Strength is not the absence of emotion. It is the command of it. But command does not come from theory. It comes from fire, from walking through the pain without collapsing into it, from facing your emptiness without trying to sedate it, from standing naked before your own chaos and refusing to look away. They cannot control a man who knows himself. They cannot market to a man who knows what he wants. They cannot manipulate a man who is willing to be hated for standing tall. You want to be free? Then become dangerous again. Not violent, not reckless, dangerous, meaning untamed in spirit, rooted in truth, immovable by shame, unapologetic in your presence. Because the world does not need more agreeable men. It needs more integrated men, men who have walked through their own darkness and emerged with gold. This is the alchemy of masculinity. This is the rebirth of manhood, and it does not begin in politics or policy. It begins in the mirror. It begins when you stop asking for permission to be what you are. It begins when you stop trying to be liked and start being real. It begins when you remember that the fire in your soul is not your enemy. It is your weapon. And yet, how many of us were taught to be afraid of that weapon? Not just by words, but by the silent architecture of our upbringing. Sit still. Be nice. Don't interrupt. Don't be too loud. Don't take up too much space. Don't be too intense. Don't be too much. These were not just lessons in politeness, they were rehearsals for emasculation. You were trained to neuter your presence before you ever learned to harness it. Because the world doesn't fear the good man. It fears the whole man. The man who has made peace with his darkness. The man who doesn't need to explode because he already owns the chaos within. The man who is terrifying not because he is cruel, but because he is utterly composed. This is the type of man who cannot be controlled through guilt, who cannot be bribed with validation, who cannot be baited with attention, because his compass is internal, because his kingdom is not external achievement, but internal alignment. Do you know how powerful a man becomes when he is no longer at war with himself? When he stops apologizing for his nature? When he stops seeking affirmation from those who benefit from his silence? He becomes ungovernable, not by laws, but by lies. They try to redefine strength as sensitivity. And while sensitivity has its place, let us not confuse the medicine with the foundation. The world was not built by soft hands. The world was not defended by agreeable voices. It was forged in fire, in discipline, in pain, in persistence, in the sacred violence of transformation. This is what they will never teach you, that masculinity is not toxic, but radioactive. It can destroy, or it can illuminate. It depends on whether the man is aware of it or possessed by it. And that awareness, that is the real battleground. The feminization of man didn't just aim to remove aggression. It aimed to remove awareness of aggression, to convince you that if you feel rage, something is wrong with you, that if you feel power, you're a threat, that if you want to dominate your circumstances, you're a danger. So you numb it, you deny it, you suppress it. And what happens to suppressed fire? It doesn't disappear. It festers, it turns inward, it corrodes, and eventually it either leaks out as passive weakness or explodes as unintegrated chaos. That is not peace. That is a spiritual infection. The man who pretends to be harmless is not virtuous. He is a liar. And the liar is always a slave to something or someone. Jung said the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Why? Because when you accept yourself completely, you become sovereign. You no longer need approval. You no longer need the permission of the tribe. And the man who doesn't need the tribe cannot be manipulated by it. That man becomes something ancient, something sacred, something unspoken. He becomes a threat to the artificial. And so, of course, society will do everything it can to keep that man asleep. Not through violence, but through comfort, through pleasure loops, through curated outrage, through digital identity, through the illusion of abundance without effort, through the illusion of connection without intimacy, through the illusion of meaning without mission. They give you substitutes for everything that once forged your soul. Substitutes for brotherhood. Substitutes for initiation. Substitutes for risk, for challenge, for conquest. But a substitute will never satisfy you. It will only pacify you. And pacified men are predictable men. You are not here to be predictable. You are here to be precise, to aim your life like a weapon not of destruction, but of clarity. Clarity is the true rebellion in a world addicted to noise. Clarity is what makes a man magnetic, not just to women, not just to wealth, but to destiny itself. But clarity only comes to the man who is willing to die. Die to his illusions. Die to the persona he created for survival. Die to the comfort that kept him tame. Because in that death, something ancient awakens. Not a boy pretending to be a man, but a man who has suffered, who has burned, who has faced the void and forged meaning anyway. And that man, he doesn't need to shout. His presence speaks louder than 1,000 opinions. This is the war behind the war. Not between men and women, not between left and right, not between rich and poor, but between the artificial man and the real one, between the boy who still needs to be mothered and the man who has fathered himself. So the next time you feel that fire rising, that primal tension inside you, don't run from it. Ask it, what do you want me to see? What have I buried? What truth am I not speaking? What part of me did I exile because the world was afraid of it? You'll find that under your anger there is clarity. Under your lust there is vitality. Under your ambition there is calling. Under your fear there is power. Every shadow is a mirror. Every demon a doorway. But only if you stop trying to be good and start becoming whole. Only then will you see the feminization of men was never just about softness. It was about soul erasure. And your rebellion is not to react with hatred. Your rebellion is to remember, to rebuild the architecture of manhood, not in the image of the system, but in the image of truth. The truth that a real man is not defined by who he pleases. He is defined by what he protects, by what he builds, by what he refuses to betray, even when it costs him everything. And that is the man they hoped you'd never become. Because that man, the one they feared you'd become, does not look to be led. He does not seek to be tamed. He does not require applause, nor does he bend for approval. He lives by law, but it is not written by governments. It is etched in his blood. It is ancient, older than institutions, deeper than ideologies, and it cannot be legislated because it was not given to him by men. It came from something eternal. The divine masculine is not an invention. It is not a trend. It is not fragile. It is the original axis of creation. Without it, civilizations fall. Without it, women suffer. Without it, children wander fatherless into the arms of the state. And that is exactly why it has been targeted. Because when men forget who they are, power gets consolidated elsewhere. The loss of masculinity is not a social shift. It is a spiritual crisis. It is the slow starvation of meaning, the erosion of myth, the sterilization of instinct. And in its place, we are offered simulations, boys raised by screens, men raised by mothers who never healed, warriors raised in classrooms where aggression is punished but compliance is praised. And so the man grows up believing that peace means passivity, that love means self-erasure, that respect means obedience. But all of that is a lie, a beautiful, seductive lie designed to keep the fire buried under blankets of guilt. Because when a man truly awakens, when he reclaims his capacity for sacred aggression, for fierce love, for anchored presence, he becomes a lighthouse in a world addicted to fog. He doesn't chase approval because his self-worth is not negotiable. He doesn't fear rejection because he is rooted in something deeper than popularity. He doesn't beg for power. He embodies it. And power embodied is the most dangerous thing in the world to those who govern through confusion. So they will try to shame him. They will call him controlling. They will label him outdated. They will try to reduce him to a caricature, a brute, a caveman, a patriarch. Why? Because they cannot refute his essence. So they ridicule his expression. But let me remind you, ridicule is the tax you pay for authenticity. And the authentic man knows that his purpose is not comfort. It is confrontation, not with others, but with the falsehoods within himself, with the stories he inherited, with the masks he wears, with the wounds he still guards like sacred relics. Because every man carries a wound, somewhere deep beneath the armor, the wound of the absent father, the wound of uninitiated boyhood, the wound of betrayal, the wound of abandonment, the wound of shame. But the wound is not the enemy. It is the passage. The modern world tells men to hide their wounds, or worse, to wallow in them, to use them as identity, as excuses, as shields. But your wound is not your definition. It is your invitation. To heal is not to forget the wound. It is to look it in the eye, name it without flinching, and walk through it until it no longer controls you. That is where strength is born, in the fire of honesty, in the furnace of pain, in the crucible where the boy dies and the man emerges, not as a perfect being, but as a sovereign one. You see, sovereignty is not arrogance. It is alignment. It is the clarity that comes when you know exactly who you are and who you are not. It is the courage to say no when the world begs for your yes. It is the calm within the storm, because you have faced storms within far greater than anything outside. And that's what they can never take from you, the self you built in solitude. Because solitude, real solitude, is not isolation. It is initiation. It is where you remember your name, not the one given to you by the world, but the one written into your bones. And once you remember that name, nothing external holds the same power over you. Not money, not fame, not validation, not rejection. Because when a man has met himself fully, he no longer fears the opinions of men who haven't. This is the threat of the awakened masculine. He is not violent. He is vigilant. He is not desperate. He is discerning. He does not react. He responds. He does not compete with boys. He mentors them or leaves them behind. And most of all, he does not need to be right. He needs to be real. That's why this movement is not about rage. It is about resurrection. The resurrection of the Father, of the builder, of the king, of the prophet, of the warrior, not as stereotypes, but as archetypes. Eternal roles written into the architecture of reality itself. Roles that no ideology can erase. Roles that no technology can replace. Because even in the most digitized, sterile, genderless future, humanity will still long for the Father's blessing, for the Elder's guidance, for the man who walks with fire in his eyes and stillness in his hands. And that man is forged, not found. Forged in silence, forged in discipline, forged in the sacred solitude, where the truth of who you are finally drowns out the noise of who you were told to be. That is your calling, not to become someone else, but to remember who you are beneath the programming, and to stand tall, silent, and utterly unapologetic in that remembrance. So now the fire stands before you. Not a metaphor, not an idea, but a choice. You can walk past it back into the numbness, back into the fog, back into the applause of a world that wants you silent, soft, and half alive. Or you can step into it. Let it burn away the falseness. Let it incinerate the self that was never yours. Let it devour the layers of politeness you mistook for peace. Let it turn the guilt to ash. Let it melt the mask. Let it sear into you the truth that you were never meant to be tamed. You were meant to be tempered, tempered like steel in the fires of suffering, purpose, and sacred wrath. You were meant to protect, to build, to guide, not from ego, but from essence. And if you feel the tremble in your chest right now, that's not fear. That's remembrance. The soul doesn't tremble when it's afraid. It trembles when it's waking up. Because somewhere in you, the lion has stirred. The king has blinked his eyes open. And the time for apology is over. You don't need permission to become whole again. You don't need their labels, their praise, or their protection. Because deep down, you know, this life, this brief, brutal, beautiful life is not a rehearsal. You don't get another round to figure it out. This is it. And if you walk away from the call now, it will haunt you. Not in nightmares, but in quiet moments. In the silence after a lie. In the ache of a life unlived. In the shame of a purpose untouched. But if you rise, if you stand today, even shaking and say no more, then everything changes. Because one awakened man changes everything. He shifts the dynamic in every room he enters. He recalibrates the behavior of those around him. He sets a new standard, not with words, but with being. He becomes the axis around which others begin to remember themselves. And that is how the world is changed. Not by mass movements, but by men who reclaim their fire, men who do not flinch when the world tries to shame them for being men, men who carry the weight of their strength with honor, men who don't need to dominate because they've mastered self-command, men who rise without rage and roar without noise. You were born for this moment, this awakening, this sacred rebellion against the great forgetting. You are not here to be nice. You are here to be noble. You are not here to seek comfort. You are here to forge character. You are not here to fit in. You are here to resurrect the real. So stand up right now in your spirit, in your breath, in your spine. Let the system see you. Let the lie feel your presence. And let the world remember. The masculine is not dead. It was only sleeping. And now the lion has awoken.